You're welcome to the second segment. This is where we're going to be applying our skirt band and then also using our scrap fabric for our design elements. Don't throw your scraps or fabrics away. They come in very useful for design details when you want to add a splash of color onto your project. So we are going to be using this beautiful kente piece to design our skirt. Now let's get started. The first thing we are going to be doing is to fold and press our darts so we can transfer the position of the darts onto the location in an easy way for sewing. So you just hold the notched position, flip it over, and then press, steam press to just make an imprint on the fabric to make it easy for you when you're sewing. So you steam press, and then when you open it, you can clearly see the imprints of the line, the impression of the line on both sides. So once you get to the machine, all you do is to hold the folded section and then stitch. Now always remember to mark your wrong sides of the fabric because you're going to be doing the stitching on the wrong side. Now you're going to imitate what you did on the front piece onto the back piece, meaning you are also going to fold and press your dart position and then mark your wrong sides on both sides of you remember the back pieces are two, so you mark both sides. So fold and also press for the dart on the back pieces. So once that is done, it makes it easy for you to sew when you get to the machine. Now time to fix our band. Fold it into two lengthwise, press it flat. So then now you can apply your interfacing. We are going to be using violin for interfacing. Mark 1 inch lengthwise and then cut out the 1 inch strip to fit into the length of the band you are working on. So you mark it neatly and then you attach it onto the band, making sure it touches the folded edge, and then you have the raw edge left to pick. You have an inch allowance left to pick the waist seam. Now move the pressing iron slowly. The slow movement of the iron helps to activate the glue or the sticky surface of the violin easily onto the fabric. Don't hurry the process. Just move the pressing iron slowly so the sticky agent on the violin is released properly onto the fabric. Now, when you look at the violin carefully, it has a shiny surface that looks as if it's a bit oily, or it looks as if water has been splashed over it. And then you have the other side that's a bit fluffy. Now the sticky or shiny surface is where the glue is or where the sticky agent is. So that's the portion to which you'd apply onto the fabric. Note that carefully. Now let's work on our design element. This is a piece of kente fabric measuring about 15 by 18 inches. So I'm going to be folding it crosswise or folding it diagonally. So to cut my strips, I'm going to be cutting on the folded edge because that would give me the stretching quality I need. And so I'm going to divide it into two first, and then I'm going to be cutting it out in 2-inch strips. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm cutting out my 2-inch strip. I'm going to be using just 2 strips. You may decide what you want to do. Now, I folded over the strip 1/2 inch at this end. I'm going to be folding 1/2 inch at the other end too. So that will give me a 1-inch finished strip. That's it, 1 inch. So 1/2 inch on both sides, folded in and neatly pressed. Do it to the second strip also. Now after folding it over, you are now going to steam press it into shape. I want a semicircled shape, and so whilst I move over with the iron, I also stretch the piece into shape. That is why I cut it on the stretchy edge, which is the diagonal end. So as I press, I fold it and then stretch it into shape. This is what I got, and this is what we are going to be using for our design detail. Let's finish up with our band now. Our raw edge on one end around the stiff will be folded onto the stiff and pressed down neatly, and then would flip the band over and then press it out also neatly. So we are going to end up having only half an inch raw edge at the end. That is what we are going to be using. That's a half inch to pick our waistline. So with this method of band fixing, it's easy for beginners. Time to stitch our darts now. Remember, the length of the dart was 5 inches and the size of the dart was 1 inch. So you measure half an inch from the top and connect it to the length, which is 5 inches. So you rule your line and then you go stitching. Now what you do is what you're going to repeat on all the remaining darts. So in total you're having 4 darts, 2 for the front and 2 for the back. You start the stitching from your half-inch point and stitch it to taper to nothing at the 5-inch point. It should be a very sharp pointed dart, not rounded at the edge. It should be sharp at the tip. And so you repeat the same process on all the other pieces. Once you're done with that, you're going to be pressing it, and then you put the 2 back pieces together. You leave your space for zip, and then you're also going to leave a space for opening at the hem of the skirt. I'm leaving about 6 inches for opening at the hem of the skirt for easy movement, and I'm also leaving about 10 inches at the top to take up the skirt zip. That's the portion I'm leaving for the skirt zip. So I'm going to stitch only the middle, just going to connect those 2 points in between the space for the zip and the space for the opening. That's the space for the opening. And so once I stitch, I pressed, and then the portion is ready to take the zip. So I'm going to be using the semi-concealed method of zip fixing. This is what we ended up with. Now this is the front portion. The dart has already been stitched and pressed towards the sides. You can see that the dart on the front side was neatly pressed. Now time to attach the zip. So I'm going to attach the method of zip fixing that shows only 1 row of stitching. The first row of stitching will be done very close to the zip. The stitching will be done very close to the zip. Very close. The stitching will be done very close to the zip. So it is the other end of the opening that's going to overlap that will show. So this first row of stitching will be done very close to the zip, and then once that is done, I'm going to stitch across and then make a half an inch stitch down and connect it at the waist. So I'm going to cross the stitch over at that point, the end of the zip, and then stitch half inch through to the waist. So that's what I'm doing. I'm stitching it right through to the waistline. And so at the end of the day, you're going to be seeing only 1 row of stitching. The initial row that we did will not show. It is only the second one that's going to show. So that's it. The zip has been done. Now time to fix my design element on the front piece. You can play around and see what suits you best. Bring out your creative abilities. See how best you can lay out your design elements. I want something on the side, so this is how I placed it. I'm going to be stitching it in position. And so done with the stitching now neatly. And so this is what I got at the end of the day. 2 beautiful strips at the side. Time to put the back onto the front piece now. We'll be pinning and marking out our measurements and then stitching. So you put the back piece onto the front piece and then pin up the hem, and the portion you left for easy movement of the legs, pin it so you're able to mark out the skirt properly. When you're done with marking, you take the pins out. So on the waistline, we're going to measure half our waist measurement, and then we move onto the hip line. And for this waistline, it will be, you use your own personal waist measurements. And so I'm using 22 for the hip, and then at the hemline you're using your half hip measurement -1 or -2, so the skirts can be a bit narrow. Since it's a pencil skirt, it has to be narrow at the hem. Time to mark out our shape. Use your French curves, shape out your hip area beautifully, and then connect the hip area to the hem with a ruler, and make sure the connection is done beautifully on both sides. Once you are done with the marking, you go ahead and check whether the seam allowances are balanced and are even, and then you go ahead with your stitching of the side seams. So you're going to stitch right from the waist down onto the hem for both the right side and the left side of the seam. Once you are done with one side, you move on to the other side and also stitch. You get to the end and then you back stitch. When you are done with stitching, you go to the pressing area, open up the seam and seam press the seam flat so you can get the shape of the skirt properly. So please make sure you open up the seam carefully and then do your seam pressing flat on both sides of the seam. When you are done, you also turn it to the right side again and also press the seam flat, making sure you've opened up the seam at the back. You press it flat on both sides, wrong side and right side, just to make sure the shape of the skirt comes out well. Now that we are done with pressing inside and outside, you can see the beautiful shape of the skirt and you can see our design elements. Pressing as you sew makes the work easy and makes the work come out beautifully. So this is what we have. Time to go fix our band. So you're going to use the raw edge, the 1/2 inch raw edge that was left, to pick up the waistline. So you're starting from one end and you're going to be stitching it right to the other end. So that's it. You're going to continue stitching until you get to the other end. Once you get to the end, you turn it over and then pin in position and then stitch. So this method of band fixing is very beginner friendly. Since you've early on pressed at the pressing table, that's other end that you are flipping over. Now time to treat your corners. You make sure you are leaving a 1-inch overlap for the band to overlap at the back, and then you do your top stitching right to the very end of the skirt. Please make sure you tuck in all loose pieces of fabric and make sure your edges are aligning beautifully with the beginning of the skirt, so the band will be equal at both sides. Once you're done with the band, you trim off your threads. So that's it for the band. That's the back part of the skirt. So we're almost done. We're going to fold in our hem now and then pin and then hem. I don't like treating my hems with stitches. I like doing needlework. And so I'm going to be using slant hemming to hem the skirt. So pin at intervals, and then you use your needle and thread to do your slip hemming at the hem of the garments to make it neat. That's our opening for easy movement. And so you start your stitch, you back stitch for reinforcement. Never start a needlework with a knot. You do your back stitches, and then you slip the needle at half-inch intervals. Pick the fabric lightly at half-inch intervals and hem. That's the finished look of the skirt, and so we are done with our skirt. Thank you for watching. Bye.